Hello, BookTube. A while ago, Matthew at Mayberry Book Club made a video in which he wondered if I've read all of the books in his tiny library. He looked at the books on his shelf and thought, Steve read all of these? He reads a lot, and he's read a lot for a long time. Is it possible that he's read every book that I own? And he put his question in the form of a video. Has Steve read it? And a lot of people, turns out, had that same question. So that video made the rounds a few years ago. And then it faded out. And time passed, and then Daniel at Guilty Feet revived it for Has Steve Read It Season 2, and it turns out that it's still got legs as a question. Lots and lots of people have weighed in on Season 2 of Has Steve Read It, including both lots of people who didn't have a BookTube channel when the first season aired, and also some returning champions. It's been an enormous amount of fun, huge amount of fun. I've been able to find all sorts of off-the-beaten-track books and listen to people talk about them. And I've also been able to make snotty comments if people don't do well. There are some guidelines. You want to pick 8 books. And you want to pick a book that walks the dividing line between something so completely and intentionally obscure that there's no chance I will have read it. An old Ford Mustang maintenance guide or something like that, and things that I'm for sure would have read. So you don't want to pick an outdated Estonian language manual, but you also don't want to pick John Adams by David McCullough. You want to try and walk the line, something that I have a chance to have read, but might not have read. That's led to a lot of great videos. While people try to rack up beans. You get 1 bean for every book on your 8 that I haven't read. And that means you have a maximum of 8 beans. And a minimum of 0 beans. And I'm happy to report no one has had 0 beans so far. Everyone has fielded at least 1 book that I haven't read. But we haven't climbed above the halfway mark. We currently have a couple of winners at 4 beans. And a couple of losers, as we would say in South Boston, wicked piss-a losers, who are down at 1 bean each. We don't have anybody higher than 4. And we have contestants pouring in. I could do a video like this every day this week. In fact, I will try to do a video like this every day this week. So we're going to try today to see if we can dislodge anyone from either the bottom of the scale or the top of the scale. And our contestant today is KD Books, who is the Booker Boy, the self-described Booker Boy, and who is very enthusiastic at the beginning of his video. I'll leave a link to his video. He's very enthusiastic that he is going to get 60%. He wants to get 60%, at least, for his choices. Will he do it? That would certainly put him well in the lead if he did. Let's see. Let's see how he does. The first book that he chooses is the Whalestone Letters, which is a companion volume to The House of Leaves by Mark Danilewski. That elucidates some of the intentional obscurity of that crappy book. And it's a yes, only because it wasn't long after House of Leaves first came out that I realized it was going to be one of my arch enemies. That it was going to be there was going to be one of those books, like Infinite Jest, where I need to contend with it. And it's acolyte readers who are just sitting there, eyes rolled up in the back of their heads, in the crack den, just getting dopamine hits from this thing. Just, yeah, keep going, man. Yeah. Oh, yeah, keep going. The Roman numeral for 50 is L, and the first letter on page 50 is L, and the main female character's name is L-E-L-L-E, and she's 50 years old, and just keep going. Keep hitting me, yeah. Anything about character? Anything about language use? Anything about pacing? About narrative? No, don't care. And once I realized that this was one of those dude bro dopamine books, I read it. I had to read it. I had to know it well. And I also had to read the companion volume, because the companion volume was only necessary because this thing is a dude bro mess. So it's a yes. So KD Books is off to a rocky start. But let's see if he does any better with his second book, which feeds into his love of the Booker Prize. It is The Elected Member by Bernice Rubens, which I guess won the Booker Prize back in 1804 or something like that. I haven't read it. I've heard of it, but I don't think I've ever seen an American edition. I don't think it's ever crossed my path. So it's a no. So KD Books now has one bean. Is he well on his way to 60%? We shall see. Let's see what the next one is. The next one, the next one, he actually prefaces in his video by saying, I know Steve reads a lot, but big books are off-putting. When I heard him say that line, I honestly was confused which Steve Donoghue he has been watching on BookTube. As far as I know, I was the only one, but it has to be an alternative, a bizarro world Steve Donoghue, to elicit a comment like big books are off-putting. So I knew that when he said that, I knew that trouble was coming, and sure enough, the book that he picks is The First Circle by Alexander Solzhenitsyn. And this is a yes, but it's not just a yes. There are categories of yeses, and one category of yeses is something that we call a facepalm. And that is when the person who is making the list puts a book on it where the only reaction I can possibly have is, what could you possibly have been thinking? To imagine any kind of scenario in which I had not read the book you're talking about. What could you possibly have been thinking? That is a facepalm. Now, there is one degree higher than a facepalm. That is what one of you called a quantum facepalm. And that is when someone picks a book where there is documentary evidence that I have read the book. No one's done that yet. And even KD Books doesn't do that now. Not technically. But Alexander Solzhenitsyn is the most formidable, most important, and also best Russian writer of the 20th century. Of course I have read The First Circle. Of course I have. So it definitely counts as a facepalm. So it's a yes and a facepalm. So we're going to move on to the next one. The next one beggars description. It almost becomes a quantum facepalm. It is certainly a facepalm. It almost becomes a facepalm. If you are doing a Has Steve Read It challenge, you are probably best advised to steer clear of canonical works of world literature. The list of canonical works of world literature is not infinite. It is not all that long. I have said many times on this channel, you could read all of those works in 2 years maximum. And that's crawling through books on bloody glass-inflected bended knees the way the rest of you do, sleeping 12 hours a day, working 12 hours a day, barely any time for reading, and crawling through it 30 pages an hour. Even then, you could get the whole of the world's canon done in 2 years. So, is there a chance? Do you honestly think there's a chance that there's a canonical pillar of world literature that I haven't read? Well, we're going to find out the answer to that question because the next book on this list is one of those pillars, and amazingly, it's not even the only one on this list. The next one is the Mabinogion. Almost speechless. KD Books breaks into a little anthem singing for whales, and maybe that blurred his thinking. Of course I have read this. Of course I have. In every English translation, it is another facepalm. It's not just a yes, it's also another facepalm. So far, we're halfway through. KD Books has only one bean, and he has 2 facepalms. So let's move on. Let's see if he can recover. He still has space to do that. The next one is The Last Attachment by Iris Origo. And it's a yes. KD Books says, not many people know about this one. Again, I realize I have 4,000 videos out there, so no one can know them all. No one should be advised to keep running track of what I have and haven't read, what I like and don't like. But I've made no secret on this channel that I have read an enormous amount about Lord Byron. An enormous amount. It's certainly... not many people have heard about this book. I have no idea. If not many people have heard about a book, then it doesn't get a paperback reprint, right? And the paperback reprint that KD Books holds up has blurbs all over it. So it's not that not many people have heard about this book. It's a really good book. I do recommend it. It's a very good study of one of the last high-profile, famous romantic attachments of Lord Byron. And in the story, not only is Byron at his most interesting, the older he gets, the more interesting he gets. But the woman in question is also interesting, and so is her family. Maybe not in attractive ways, but it's just a fascinating story. And it's a wonderful book, but it is a yes. We will, for forbearance sake, refrain from calling it a facepalm. Because although I don't think there was much chance that you would think that I hadn't read it, it's possible that not many people in the general reading populace have read it. One way or another, we're gonna forbear calling it a facepalm and just move on. The next book is On Murder by Thomas de Quincey. And this also is not a facepalm, but I have mentioned this book many times. I have read it, of course, many times. I've referenced it on March Mystery Madness many times. This is de Quincey writing about murder. And it is fascinating. In my opinion, much, much more, I won't say effective, but much more of an indication, much more indicative of the way he usually wrote, of the way he sounds on the page, than his famous book, Confessions of the English Opium Eater, is atypical for him. That's the book that secured his immortality. But if you read the rest of him, even a fair sampling of some other stuff that he wrote, you realize that he was working in a totally different register in that book. Maybe that's why it caught on. But On Murder is much closer to what he sounds like, so to speak. And I have read it. It is a yes. So then we'll move on to the next one. The next one is Train to Pakistan by Khuswant Singh. And it's an important work. It's a very gripping work. It is a yes. I've lived in India. And I had a lot of people on the way there, while I was there, on the way back, whenever anybody hears from me that I love India. This is one of the books that they recommend. It is a well-known book. It's not well-known enough to be a facepalm, but I still have to wonder. One way or another, it's a yes. And it's a recommend, much like The Last Attachment. It's a recommend. And then we have the final book. And that is the Mahabharata. The Mahabharata, which is the second pillar of world literature that is invoked on this list. The Mahabharata is immense. It's gigantic. It's incredibly interesting, incredibly involving. Once you get used to it, it takes a lot of getting used to, but if you can do it for The Tale of Genji, you can certainly do it for this. And not only is it a yes, but of course, it's a facepalm. It is a massively, massively influential work of world literature. It is indispensable. If I made you a list of the 40 books of world literature that you have to read in order to do those 2 years, the Mahabharata would be on that list. Maybe not the unabridged. I've read the unabridged version in 4 volumes, 4 1,000-page volumes from the University of Chicago Press. I kick myself still. I saw that 4-volume set at the Brattle Bookshop about a year ago, and I didn't get it. And I kick myself about that still. I don't have the original volumes that I got from the University of Chicago, and you don't often see that whole set. And I saw it there, and looking back, I still can't remember why I didn't snap it up. Maybe they were written in or highlighted, and I'm not remembering that part. But one way or another, I wish that I could go back and change that decision. I wish that I could get those volumes. KD Books holds up what looks like a children's illustrated version of the Mahabharata. It looked like it was about 100 pages long, 200 pages long, something like that. The original is immense. And there's a huge amount of critical scholarship that can be appended to it, as though that University of Chicago set, very distinctive looking in black with gold letters, is the one to have if you really want to devote a whole year to reading the Mahabharata. But one way or another, the idea that you would put a list together and think that I hadn't read it, even in the illustrated children's version that he holds up, is just mind-boggling. I don't know how anyone could think that. And yet, KD Books does. The Booker Boy does. And that was his attempt at the second season of Has Steve Read It? I don't know if you've been keeping close numerical track at home, but keep in mind his goal was 60%. By my calculations, he achieved not 60%, but 12%. In other words, 1 bean. And we're not saying that facepalms counteract beans. They don't. That may be a rule in the future, just to dissuade you from picking Dombian frickin' sons. But it isn't a rule now. We're not saying that facepalms detract from beans. But nevertheless, KD Books got 1 bean and 3 facepalms. And 2 of those facepalms very nearly became our first ever quantum facepalms. So you can factor that in as you please, but one way or another, I think a little crying over Guinness is in order, because this showing ranks KD books down at the bottom. Down at the bottom. So we have a few people at 1 bean and a couple of people at 4 beans. And the group down at 1 bean now has an extra person. You got to make room at the trencher table for one more person sobbing in his room temperature beer. And that is your episode of Has Steve Read It Season 2 today. Now, there are plenty of episodes in the production shoot. Will tomorrow's contestant do any better? They could hardly do worse. Will they break 4 beans? Tune in tomorrow and find out. Thank you, BookTube.